Mr. Dorsey, does voter fraud exist?
I don't know for certain.
Are you an expert in voter fraud?
No, I'm not.
Well, why then is Twitter right now putting purported warnings on virtually any statement about voter fraud?
We're simply linking to a broader conversation so that people have more information.
No, you're not. You put up a page that says, quote, voter fraud of any kind is exceedingly rare in the United States. That's not linking to a broader conversation. That's taking a disputed policy position, and you're a publisher when you're doing that. Are you aware that just 2 weeks ago in the state of Texas, a woman was charged with 134 counts of election fraud? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
If I tweeted that statement with a link to the indictment, would you put a warning on it that says, well, the Democratic Party position right now is voter fraud doesn't exist?
I don't think it's useful to get into hypotheticals, but I don't believe so.
You don't believe so? Well, we're going to test that because I'm going to tweet that and we'll see what you put on it.
What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering, and Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey are again on the hot seat as Senate has asked them to answer for many of the ways in which they had involved themselves with the election and how it relates to their current Section 230 protections. To give you a 30,000-foot view, essentially, as a platform, they can't be held accountable or liable for things that their users might post on them, as long as they take like some reasonable action to remove something that might be egregious. However, when they act as a publisher, in this case, whether that is censoring unfairly one side of the aisle over the other, making mistakes, which seem to always go against one side of the aisle over the other, or labeling tweets as misinformation, even when they are factual, to favor one side over the other. These are all things that a publisher would do. This is why, by the way, I use Parler and Minds.com. I know a lot of people still use Facebook. I'm not going to deprive you of getting your family photos, but for primary use, you should really be using Parler.com and Minds.com, and really any other alternative, whether it's Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, or if you're on here on YouTube and this is how you choose to consume your video content, I only ask that you click that red subscribe button down below. I cover a wide variety of topics every day, and I just want it to be easier for you to locate my videos, as YouTube works actively against independent content creators. So hopefully today will be the day that you subscribe. Now, under oath, Mark Zuckerberg has admitted that he does have tools to track his users across the internet, across platforms, across accounts, all without user knowledge. Think about that. This is a massive revelation. Again, Josh Hawley of Missouri, constitutional lawyer. Under oath, Zuckerberg admits Facebook does have tools to track its users across the internet, across platforms, across accounts, all without user knowledge. I ask how many times this tool has been used domestically against Americans, and Zuckerberg will not say. A Facebook whistleblower tells me it's called Centra. Example below. Zuck said he couldn't recall the name. He's only the company CEO after all. And there is a wide swath of new information. Here you go. Hawley throws a curveball at Zuckerberg when he asks him about Facebook tool that tracks users across platforms. We already know that he has admitted to that. Senator Sherrod Brown's response to his colleagues berating him on Twitter for speaking up on behalf of public health. Ted Cruz and the Truth aren't known for their intimacy. Of course, you see many revelations coming out. One of the statements, Jack said, Twitter would likely flag, quote, absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. Carter-Baker Commission on Election Reform. By the way, this is a fact. Interesting moment now. Senate Judiciary Committee. Jack said Twitter would likely flag two statements regarding voter fraud read to him by Senator Ted Cruz. The statements came from the Carter-Baker Commission on Election Reform. Justin Amish saying, note that it isn't possible for the government to require Twitter and Facebook or anyone else to make it politically neutral, i.e. content-based moderation decisions, no matter how you change Section 230 without violating the First Amendment. This is, quite frankly, incorrect. You don't have to offer these platforms any type of government protections. It isn't a violation. If you remove Section 230 protections, platforms become, yes, more likely to censor. Of course they do. But that means that you'll have more options out there, and smaller platforms will have a chance to move in as bigger platforms open themselves up to all sorts of litigation when they choose that they want to act like a publisher and not a platform. Let's take a look at this article on AZ Central. So you're the ultimate editor. Twitter's Jack Dorsey and Facebook Mark Zuckerberg accused of censoring conservatives. Republicans accused Facebook and Twitter of meddling in the election to harm President Donald Trump by censoring conservatives with warnings on GOP tweets about mail-in ballots. Democrats criticized their failure to rein in Trump's efforts to delegitimize the election and took aim at their GOP colleagues for putting on a, quote, political sideshow to browbeat two of the nation's leading technology CEOs. Well, of course, the far left worships Silicon Valley. Look, I don't consider myself a Republican. I don't think I ever will. I consider myself center left or center right, depending on the issues. But why is it only the Republicans that seem to care about this type of censorship? Yes, some things, adding that a claim is disputed when it's clearly been disputed, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But I don't believe that it's being enforced evenly. And you can see that one side of the aisle wants more restrictions, and the other side of the aisle wants less. I don't know about you, but I know which one I'd side with. The bipartisan grilling from lawmakers before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Tuesday, the second virtual appearance from Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter's Jack Dorsey in less than 3 weeks, reflected growing and collective ire about big tech. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham opened the hearing with a call to reform Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Yeah, the Republicans should have done this 3 years ago. The Senate Judiciary Committee is moving forward with a bill from Graham and Senator Rich Blumenthal from Connecticut to reform Section 230 called the Earn It Act, which would strip away some of the decades-old legal protections that shield tech companies from liability of what users post on their platforms. Graham challenged Facebook and Twitter's decision to throttle the spread of the New York Post article about Mr. Biden's dealings. You're the ultimate editor, he said. Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, took issue with the way Facebook and Twitter police content. There are instances in which your platforms are taking very distinctively partisan approach and not a neutral one to election content moderation, he said. Zuckerberg and Dorsey defended their company's policies while expressing their willingness to work with lawmakers to reform Section 230. We are well overdue, Zuckerberg said in his opening remarks. We would benefit from clearer guidance from elected officials. Well, you're going to get it. The broadsides from the left intensified during Tuesday's hearing. Blumenthal threatened to break up Facebook by peeling off Instagram and WhatsApp. He also accused Facebook of caving to pressure from conservatives and backing off increased enforcement of dangerous misinformation and voter suppression tactics before 2 January runoffs in Georgia that will determine who controls the Senate. Trump continues to promote unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud and to contest Joe Biden's victory on social media. Graham and other Republican lawmakers are backing the president, even as federal and state officials declare the election was the most secure in history. Quote, they are working the refs and they are winning, Blumenthal said. Are they winning, though? Researchers have found no evidence that Facebook and Twitter are biased against conservative voices or viewpoints. I disagree. And the companies deny any politically motivated censorship. I also disagree. But Republican lawmakers continue to allege that tech companies suppressed New York Post articles. They did on the business dealings of Biden's kid lead up to the election, but they did. They did. They falsely claimed that it was our policy against hacked materials, even though there was never any indication that it was actually hacked. The GOP majority on the Senate Judiciary Committee threatened Dorsey and Zuckerberg with subpoenas if they didn't appear voluntarily for Tuesday's hearing. It was originally billed as an indictment of how companies handled the New York Post coverage of Biden, but focused more instead on their handling of the election. One of my favorite clips here was, you see also Zuckerberg to Graham, we don't design Facebook to be addictive. That's flatly false. The entire business model is based on addiction. Of course it is. And you see this clip of Senator Ted Cruz absolutely eviscerating Jack Dorsey. You see here. And look, this is a perfect setup and destruction, and I'm going to share a little bit of it with you. Hopefully, C-SPAN allows it.
Shift to a different topic. Mr. Dorsey, does voter fraud exist?
So he asked him quite plainly, does voter fraud exist?
I don't know for certain.
I don't know for certain. Well, of course it does.
Are you an expert in voter fraud?
No, I'm not.
Well, why then is Twitter right now putting purported warnings on virtually any statement about voter fraud?
That's a good question, right?
We're simply linking to a broader conversation so that people have more information.
No,
No.
you're not. You put up a page that says, quote, voter fraud of any kind is exceedingly rare in the United States.
Yes, he's right.
That's not linking to a broader conversation. That's taking a disputed policy position. And you're a publisher when you're doing that. You're entitled to take a policy position, but
Right.
you don't get to pretend you're not a publisher and get a special benefit under Section 230
He's 100% right.
as a result.
That link is pointing to a broader conversation with tweets from publishers and people all around the country.
Mr. Dorsey, would the following statement violate Twitter's policies?
Here we go.
Quote, absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud.
I imagine that we would label it so that people can have more context and read through.
How about this quote? Quote, third-party organizations, candidates, and political activists. Voter fraud is particularly possible where, quote, third-party organizations, candidates, and political party activists are involved in, quote, handling absentee ballots. Would you flag that as potentially misleading?
I don't, know the specifics of how we might enforce that, but I imagine a lot of these would have a label pointing people to a bigger conversation.
Well, you're right. You would label them because you've taken the political position right now that voter fraud doesn't exist. I would note both of those quotes come from the Carter-Baker Commission on Federal Election Reform. That is Democratic President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker. And Twitter's position is essentially voter fraud does not exist. Are you aware that just 2 weeks ago in the state of Texas, a woman was charged with 134 counts of election fraud? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
If I tweeted that statement with a link to the indictment, would you put a warning on it that says, well, the Democratic Party position right now is voter fraud doesn't exist?
I don't think it's useful.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's crazy.
I will say it's dismaying listening to the questions from our Democratic colleagues, because consistently the message from Senate Democrats is for Facebook and Twitter and Google to censor more,
Yes.
to abuse their power more, to silence voices that Senate Democrats disagree with more.
This is factually correct.
That is very dangerous if we want to maintain a free and fair democracy, if we want to maintain free speech. There was a time when Democrats embraced and defended the principles of free speech. There was a time when Democrats embraced and defended the principles of a free press.
I don't disagree with anything they're saying. Now get off your rears and do something. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe. It's right below the video. Make sure you smash like on your way out and you check back off. And I've got 5 or 6 videos planned for today. Hope you enjoyed this one. We'll talk to you again real soon.